Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and this is Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle, your host once again. Please visit our website, www.legendsofsuperstitionmountains.com. Got more bark notes up, got more stuff coming. So always go over there and take a look around. Everything will link back to here to the videos that we have on YouTube. Additionally, please hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. We do answer our comments. So, that all being said and done, Dutch Hunter Rendezvous, October 25th, 26th, and 27th, Friday, Saturday, and then we'll pick it all up Sunday and go. Guest speakers Saturday night. We'll have the campfire chat Friday night. We'll have more stuff forthcoming of what we're going to kind of be doing and setting up through that. We got it all put away. So now we move on to today's story. This one's a bit different, a little separate, but it's a personal recollection. And I always like those because something will come to mind and then I'll think about it, and then it takes a day or two because I'm trying to figure out how much do I remember of it. Is it a worthwhile storytelling? And we'll set it up a little before we get to the meat of the story that you probably came here to hear. This goes back, it's probably 98, 99, and I'm working, I can say the name of the company because the company no longer exists, Shuck Component Systems, Shuck Construction. So I'd been working there, and we had a guy we worked with. His name was Ray. He was also known as Jose. He was from Mexico. He showed up. He was Reynoso. We'll call him Ray. And then he'd disappear. Showed back up with his brother. His brother, I think, was a Jose, and then that time he was Jose. And then they were gone again. Then Jose showed up again as Reynoso. And it would be confusing because you'd say, hey, Ray. And he'd be like, no, I'm Jose. It's like, no, you're not. You're Ray. I know you're the same guy. Anyways, third or fourth time he came back, his uncle came with him too. I'm pretty sure it was his uncle. And the three of them were there, and I think they were all Jose. And I remember sitting there one day with them, and I asked them, okay, what name did they give you? What name do you have documented as? And I believe they were all Jose Green. They were all Joe Green. And I wanted to see, because I wanted to see the IDs and stuff they had, because it looked good. It was pretty verifiable. But two of them had the same social security number, which was pretty funny. But good workers, about 4.5 feet tall. Jose, spoke pretty good English. His brother didn't really at all much. Some spoken English. And the uncle, I don't know if he ever spoke any English. He probably knew a few words and stuff, but they couldn't really understand. So what would happen is if I was sitting there and they were I went over and was talking to Ray, he would kind of like interpret what we were talking about, because they'd be interested. They'd look over, and then if one of them had something to interject, then I had to wait. So it could be a painful process through lunch. But sometimes I go over and sit with them at lunch. I was always curious about people and where they'd come from. I cannot remember the name of the town. I believe it was somewhere in Chihuahua. I could be wrong, but I thought it was somewhere in central Chihuahua. It was a very small town, what you call Pueblo Village. I think Ray had told me only 200-300 people lived there. And it was a dying place where people were leaving if they could get out, but there was just really no income. There was some agriculture, some things, but it wasn't even self-sustaining at that point. I think it was off the highway too. He said a lot of the smaller towns and places survived because they're on the highways, some of the main roads. And this place was a little bit off the main road, so there really wasn't much anything there. Good workers, like I said, about 4.5 feet tall, not much to them. And I love discussing how he got back and forth, the amount of money. They were there basically. Ray came originally to get some medical work done at the time. It was, believe it or not now, but it seemed to be cheaper And I think by getting in the company and the company insurance, he was able to get this procedure done. It had something to do with his palate or something like that. And he explained it, but when someone doesn't have that grasp of English, they don't understand it. You got to know him and realize most everything he got, he basically bought goods and then they would return to Mexico. Sometimes voluntarily, they would just load up, and then just go back to Mexico. The main purpose was he knew he couldn't bring his family to the U.S. There was too many members of his family between his brothers, sisters, uncles, and I think his parents may have still been alive. So since that was impossible, it was trying to get family members up. They would come work, buy goods here and stuff, and then they would take things back. So he was trying to help the town, village, pueblo out as much as he could, and he said he didn't really have much. It was kind of funny because I would be like, where do you guys stay? And it's like 7 or 8 of them stayed in a small, crappy apartment. I said, are the people curious? There's so many of you? And he says, no, we all like look alike and we're all Jose. And he had a sense of humor about it. So anybody who remembers those days when we worked there, any of the guys that worked with me will remember, and they'll remember Ray. He was a pretty good guy, and I understood his financial social aspect. He really did not want to stay here. His brother kind of liked it here, but he said, there's no way he could get his family. They could not afford at that time for documents and everything else to get across and do that. He said, and I can't remember the numbers, but he would explain the numbers of how much it costs to get them to the border, how much it costs to get across the border, to get things set up. And he said, you deal with a lot of bad people. Sometimes all your money they just take and then they never show up, and you just end up stranded and you have to go back home and you lost all your money. So he said it's very bad, very poor, but he said they were doing pretty well. He had someone that was a good connection, but he said sometimes things don't work out, and he said I have to go home and then I try to come back. So, and he came back 3 or 4 times. It was always funny, and I think the reason they hired him was because of that. He was such a good worker, and he was a nice guy, and he spoke pretty good English. Plus, he made better wages. His uncle and brother never really caught on to it, but they had classes and where they could learn English. And if you took the classes, they actually got more pay. So their pay level would go up as they were working. So, pretty good guy. Worked with him. But one day we're sitting there, and I finally, on occasion, would just ask him, what about your town? Now, I can't pronounce it. Had T's, G's, H's, just grammatically impossible. I asked him kind of where it was, and it's been over 25 years. So, but he would tell it, and I remember every time I would say the name of the town, he would tell me no and explain it again. I could never quite get the pronunciation right because it was really tough with his accent. But additionally, it was a bit of a long name, and it didn't have anything in it like Los or Madre or something that I could hang on to some degree. And like I said, he said it was off the highway, a very small place, 200-300 people. And so I wanted to know a little about that little village town. I mean, because are you like living like hillbillies? And he said there wasn't really much there. There wasn't, telephone. At the time when he had left the last time, they didn't really have a telephone. There was a few telephones, but he didn't have a telephone. A family lived in a couple different houses. He says it's a big family for him. He said everybody's there. It's hard to get out when you don't have the ability, the funds and stuff, even to go somewhere else. He said a lot of Mexico is dangerous. So where they're at, it's very peaceful. It's very, very poor, but it was peaceful. So he said that's one of the reasons the family stays there. And occasionally he would say something, and his brother and uncle would nod, and then they would say something additionally to agree with him. And that. So I was like, well, what about historically this small town? How did it start? Because it wasn't an agricultural hub. It was back in the mountains a little. I said, was there any old Spanish silver or gold mines? And he said, oh, yeah, Spanish mines. Many Spanish mines. And I'm kind of at that point thinking, this is pretty interesting. So I'm kind of like, there'll be some historical context. And he goes, but they're cursed. And I'm like, oh, they're cursed. And he's like, yes, they're cursed. I said, well, how's the curse work? And he says, well, nobody will do anything. The Spanish would curse the gold and the mines. And he says they'd put skulls, bury the skulls of people with them. And they put a curse. And he said people would go up in the mountains. And he says when they dig it up, there's just ash. Now later I heard this story more than once, so I understand that's their belief is if there's a curse on the gold and you find the gold, that the gold or silver, the treasure will turn to ash when you go to dig it up. The other thing I heard is the Spanish, knowing the native population began believing this, would put ash on top of the treasure, because once those guys hit a skull in ash, they would just give up. So I didn't know this then. So we're just, again, talking, and his brother and uncle would be put in a little couple things. I'm like, huh. So I said, nobody ever goes out and does that. And he says, oh no, people do. People do. And he says, but they, things happen. And he says, they get sick, they die. And I said, oh, they get sick and die. And he says, yes, they go out and they go, and then bad things happen. And he says there was a priest that told them he would try to go bless and remove the curse, and then he died. And I'm like, he said his father had told him that story. And so I'm like, oh, this is really kind of interesting, the urban legend myth through generation to generation. And I said, does anybody ever still attempt? And he said, people do. But he said when they go out, there's a curse, but there's a thing, and he would try to explain it, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And I said, well, are you saying like there's a demon or something? Oh yeah, demon. And they're all like, oh yeah. And I'm like, well, what's the demon, what does it do and all? And he says, well, you go out there, and then it can smell you, or it gets a piece of your clothing, and it comes back to town to look for you and your family, and then it takes one of your babies or your children. And I'm hearing a familiarity note here, so I'm like, huh. So what does it look like? And he goes, oh, it's like, it walks like a man, but it's like a monkey. It's got hair on it, and it has a dog head, and it has bat wings. And I'm like, so it has wings, it can fly? And he says, yes, it can fly, and it's got a dog's head and all that. I'm pausing, and I'm like, did you ever see this? I mean, have any of you ever seen this? And Ray actually says, no, I saw this when I was younger. And I said, really? And he says, yes. And I said, so it was at night, you woke up, or somebody was stealing one of your set? He says, no, my family don't look for the mines. He says, it was like sunset, before sunset. He says it was still, you could see out. And he heard people scream and things, and he looked out the window, and his mom pulled him away. But he went back and he looked out, and what he saw through the window of the house was this. He said it was a monkey with wings with a dog head walking by. And he says it was probably 20, 30 feet away. And he said it was like sniffing the air, like it was looking for someone. And he says it was looking for that person that had tried to go get the gold or silver or something. I said, so you saw it? And he said, yes. And I said, did you ever see it fly? And he's like, no. Now, it's funny because years later I'd meet Francisco, who I'd talked about, and his uncle had said he'd seen one flying. So two people I've met that met it. Now, further with Ray, I said, well, are we talking about a chupacabra? And then they had kind of got freaked out. And he goes, no, you can't say that. You can't say that. Because the uncle and brother reacted. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, if you say the name, it might come looking for us. It'll hear that, and it'll come, and it could make somebody sick or something. And I'm like, I think you guys are overblowing this. I don't really believe the chupacabra. And they were getting really uncomfortable, so I said, okay, I'll leave that alone. I won't say it no more. So I said, so nobody is interested in going out there. He says, nah, the Germans, the Canadians, the Americans, they've had companies come and then they leave. And he says, because people get sick. And I said, so is it something to do with the earth or whatnot? And he's like, no, it's the curse. I'm like, okay, whatever. He says there was missionaries that came down. And the missionary group was by the town and helping. So they come in and bring medicine and look at the children. And they set up a little school. And he says they're just there for a while and then they leave. But they come in and they help work, they help with the houses, fix things, water in the wells and stuff. And he says it's very good, but they heard about it. And I said, oh, so they wanted to go find the gold. He said they just wanted to see what we were talking about. And he said someone took them out and drew them a map and told them about where it was. And then they went out and looked around. They came back, and he says, then all of them got very, very sick and went home. And he said the person that took them out there died, but he didn't go all the way with them, so we know something happened. And I'm just like, particularly like, I don't know, Ray, man, this seems a little far-fetched. And I realize the further we talk, the deeper down the rabbit hole we seem to be going with this. And I said, well, what about me and the guys on my crew? What if we go? And he goes, oh, you guys might get a little sick. He says, you guys are local. And I'm like, what do you mean? He says, you guys are crazy, man. And he talked to his uncle and his brother, and they were like in agreement. He says, you guys are crazy. You come down there, you maybe get a little sick, but you can't find no gold because it turns to ash. And so I realized it was like a multi-layered thing of, if you go, this monkey bat thing will come follow you home, steal your children. But additionally, even if you find something, it turns to ash. So it's literally, there's no reason kind of almost not to even attempt any of this. I thought it was a great story. The finish to it, which I still feel is just there's a natural explanation, is a few days later, because I didn't eat lunch with them every day. A few days later, the next week, I go over to sit down with them again and go to talk. And I'm like sitting there and go, yeah, I wanted to talk a little more about the village, the Pueblo they were from. And try to see if I could get that name down at the time. Because I found the history, where they came from and the generations. They knew their generational line and so forth. So I was very interested in some of it and some of the stories they might have heard passed down. And they were like, his uncle and brother didn't think we needed to talk about those things anymore. And I'm like, why? Because I'd said, they couldn't say the word, but I'd said chupacabra and we talked about it. And then his uncle got sick and was sick for a few days. And I said, well, it's been the flu going around, so he probably just had the flu. No. He says it because we talk about that with you. And because we talk about it, it got him sick. And now he's worried about his family. So we're not going to talk about it anymore. So that was my conversation with Ray and his brother and his uncle. I found it very, very interesting because I've learned since then things that add up, that's a belief. And I was really kind of honed in on like, man, these guys really do believe this stuff. Now, there was a guy who would come over and listened into some of it, and he was very conservative Christian, and then he also bugged them out, and they had to keep him away from him. We had to tell him he wasn't allowed to talk to them anymore because he started bringing the Bible and stuff and trying to explain to them that was the devil. It got very weird with him. And they didn't want to talk about it no more because they thought if he's talking to them, they're going to get sick. And this guy's crazy, different loco than my loco. So it got very weird at the end. But I don't know what happened to those guys. I don't think they were there when I left. I left probably May, June of 2000. And I don't remember if Ray or Jose were there. I know the uncle wasn't, but I don't know if either one of them was still there. But the guy was just a little guy, man. But always smiling, always a nice guy. Enjoyed working with him. I didn't work on the same line or in the same department as him or anything, but always enjoyed, always smiling and hard workers, man. Both, all three of them, but him and his brother were really hard workers. And I know, I don't know, I'm not going to say names, but the lead over there, the foreman that they worked for, loved them too. They could do anything, and they could learn almost anything. They're very skilled, so good guys. But I just recently been thinking about that with some of the other stories and things that we kind of talked about, and I thought that is kind of an interesting story because it builds on when you go down to Mexico to one of these small places and you start talking generationally. There is a belief system still that resides. And then of course years later with Francisco and his uncle, I would find, it continues even into modern, because Francisco had to be in his 20s and his uncle had to be in his late 30s, early 40s, and they were devout believers either. So Don't be surprised. You go down to a small town in Mexico, somewhere in the mountains, and if you look out and you see a chimpanzee with bat wings and a dog head just walking down the street in broad daylight, he's just trying to sniff someone out for looking for the silver and gold, I guess. That would be what my guess is. So there you go. That was Chasing Legends for this week. Next week we'll get back into a little more of treasure stories we can find, because I don't want to send anyone down to lose their babies or get sick or die. So we'll stay away from there, even if I remember the name of the town. So until the next time, I hope everybody's well. Hope everybody had a great weekend. Everybody has a great week. Rendezvous 25th, 26th, 27th. Catch the website, www.legendssuperstitionmountains.com. And until the next time, always remember, I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was Chasing Legends.